Welcome to the Hollow Creek Cemetery, a place shrouded in eerie tales and local legends. This place, with its ancient tombstones leaning precariously under the weight of time, worn statues with cracked faces that bear silent witness to the passing of centuries, and a rusty iron fence that struggles to remain upright, is more than just a final resting place. It's a realm where the living and the dead seem to blur into one. The air here is always damp, heavy with the scent of rotting leaves and something sour like the breath of the crypt. Every sound seems magnified. The rustling of the wind through the skeletal trees, the hooting of an owl from a distant branch, even the crunch of gravel underfoot seems to echo through the pervasive silence. But it's when the sun dips below the horizon that the locals say Hollow Creek truly comes alive. They talk of faint scratching sounds that seem to come from beneath the soil, as if those interred are trying to claw their way back to the surface. They whisper about shadowy figures that stand among the tombstones, their forms flickering in the moonlight, watching. Some locals will tell you, if they've had a drink or two, that they've seen ghostly apparitions drifting between the tombstones, their spectral faces etched with a sorrow that transcends time. Others speak of a low, mournful wailing that drifts across the graveyard in the dead of night, a sound so chilling, so full of despair that it makes the blood run cold. And yet, for all its sinister reputation, for all the whispered stories and half-imagined sightings, Hollow Creek Cemetery has an allure that's hard to resist. Perhaps it's the lure of the unknown, the thrill of coming face to face with the supernatural, or maybe it's just youthful bravado. Whatever the reason, none of these tales stopped Ryan, Lexi, and Chris from sneaking in on a dare. With Ryan adjusting his camera and Lexi shivering from the cold, they stepped deeper into the cemetery. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. The scent of decay was potent in the air, a grim reminder of the graveyard's purpose. Ryan, ever the brave one, tried to lighten the mood. "All right, where are those ghosts?" he joked, a nervous laugh echoing through the tombstones. But Lexi wasn't laughing. She was too busy rubbing her arms, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Chris, ever the skeptic, dismissed her discomfort. "It's all in your head," he said, kicking a loose stone, the sound echoing through the cemetery. But even he couldn't deny the unsettling nature of the place. The first strange noise came without warning, a low, shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet through the dead grass. They turned, flashlights sweeping across the graveyard. But there was nothing, just the whispering wind in the moonlight reflecting off the moss-covered gravestones. Then a whisper, so close it made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Lexi's eyes widened. "Did you?" But Chris cut her off, his finger to his lips. His other hand pointed towards a row of graves. A tall shadow moved behind them, gliding more than walking. "Who's there?" Ryan called out, his voice trembling despite his best efforts. Silence was the only answer. The whisper came again, this time right behind them. They spun around, their flashlights revealing a fresh grave. The dirt was loose, as if it had been recently dug up. And then the unthinkable happened. The dirt moved, revealing a pale, rotting hand. Its fingers curled, the nails blackened with decay. The sight was enough to send them running, their screams echoing through the graveyard, a chilling testament to the horror they had witnessed. With the sight of the rotting hand, their hearts pounded in their chests, their blood turned to ice. The night air suddenly seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. Ryan, Lexi, and Chris bolted from the fresh grave, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the whispers grew into murmurs, a low, guttural language that seemed older than the ancient graveyard itself. Their feet pounded against the earth, sending loose stones skittering. The tombstones seemed to blur together as they ran, their flashlights casting long, dancing shadows. The entrance to the cemetery seemed to have disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. Chris, the most skeptical of the trio, tripped over an unseen root. He landed hard, a groan escaping his lips. Ryan and Lexi pivoted, their flashlights illuminating his fallen figure, and then they saw it. Looming over Chris was a tall, gaunt figure. It had hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light from their flashlights, and a grin that stretched too wide across its face. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its fingers were long and sharp, ending in blackened nails. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It merely stared at the fallen Chris with an eerie silence. Chris let out a strangled scream as the being reached down and grabbed his ankle with a bone-chilling grip. Ryan and Lexi, terror taking over, turned and ran. They didn't look back. They couldn't. The sound of Chris's screams echoed through the graveyard, growing fainter and fainter until they were swallowed by the night. Ryan and Lexi burst through the broken iron gate, their flashlights casting a harsh glare on the deserted street. They were alone. Chris was gone. All that was left was an eerie silence, broken only by their labored breaths and pounding hearts. The Hollow Creek Cemetery was silent once more, but the whispers, the murmurs, they remained, lingering in the air like a chilling reminder of the night's horrifying events. With Chris's screams fading into the night, all that was left was an eerie silence. The next morning brought more questions than answers. The Hollow Creek Cemetery, once a silent spectator to their bone-chilling encounter, now lay silent and undisturbed. Search crews scoured every inch of the graveyard, but there was no trace of Chris. No fresh graves, no signs of struggle, no eerie whispers. It was as if Chris had simply vanished. But Lexi knew different. She remembered the tall shadow, the rotting hand, the wide grin, and sometimes when the night was at its darkest and the wind blew just right, she'd walk past the cemetery and hear it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. Chris's voice calling to her from beneath the ground, a chilling reminder of the terrifying and mysterious beings that dwell in the shadows, unseen and unheard. Beware, there are terrifying and mysterious beings that few have ever seen and lived to talk about. Join us for more bone-chilling chronicles, if you dare!